How the period without a father passed after 2 years after a severe loss. Thomas began to notice how this pain, which he could not let go, was consuming his insides. He felt that every day he was becoming more and more alien to himself and to those around him. His world became small and dark, where there was no room for joy or hope. Everything seemed meaningless. He could not find any answer to his question, why did this happen? Why his father? How to live on when his best friend, his protector, was no longer with him? Over time, Thomas began to avoid meeting with friends. He could not understand how people could continue to live their lives when they were the ones who made fun of him. Every time he saw one of his classmates laughing or joking, it caused him even more anger and a sense of injustice. He did not know how to behave, how to address people, and therefore he closed in on himself even more. Even at school, where his former friends tried to support him, Thomas could not find a common language with them. They tried to help, but their words lacked what he needed, an understanding of the pain he lived with every day. He felt even more alone when he came home. His mother, although she was there, was also experiencing loss and was drawn into her own pain. She did not have the strength to give him the support he needed. Marta became silent, her gaze was often empty, she could not find the strength even to talk to Thomas. Her sadness only increased the feeling of emptiness in the house. Thomas felt that his mother was moving away from him, and this only increased his feeling of isolation. They could not find a way to live through this pain together, so each of them was left alone with him. Thomas tried to be strong, tried not to show that he was broken inside, but it was unbearably difficult. Every time he looked at his mother and saw her looking like a shadow of herself, his heart ached even more. She was the one who needed support the most, but she needed the same. And when she couldn't talk about it, Thomas didn't know how to comfort her, how to share his pain with her. He felt weak because he couldn't find the words to express what he felt, and he couldn't comfort her. His anger, although it didn't fly into the open population, found its way out in small fights. He reacted aloof and irritated to everyone who tried to get close. The slightest remarks seemed unfriendly to him. Maybe they were just misunderstandings, but for Thomas everything became difficult. He felt offended, even if they were ordinary words that he wouldn't have noticed before. He couldn't accept that the world was moving on and his life was frozen. He doesn't know how to keep going when the one who supported him and who was always there is no more. Thomas understood that even if he was silent, his heart was filled with pain that he could not push away. The memory of his father was so clear that every day without him seemed like a cruel repetition of the last day he was still alive. He could not forget how they shared moments together with laughter, and now this feeling seemed very real. At that time, Thomas began to spend more time alone, trying to sort out his feelings, which were too many, but he could not find a way to express them. He sought some solace in books, in the musical compositions that he had once listened to with his father. These sounds became for him a bridge to the memory of him, but each time they brought even more pain. He began to realize that although his father was no longer there, he would never leave his heart, even if his physical presence was gone. And that realization hurt even more, but he began to accept that it was these memories, painful as they were, that would ultimately. The first months after Thomas's father died were a period of profound shock for him. It wasn't just grief, it was a feeling of complete incomprehension, as if everything he knew and loved was suddenly crumbling. The pain he felt was indescribably heavy. His mind couldn't accept this reality, and his heart refused to believe that his father was no more. He couldn't understand how his best friend, the person who had always been there for him and always supported him, could simply be absent. This gap between his inner world and the surrounding reality was too great. Thomas felt a heavy weight filling his body, as if something huge was pressing on his chest, not letting him breathe. The pain was so deep that even in moments of silence he couldn't find peace. He had no answer to the questions that constantly swirled in his head. How can I live on? How is it possible to live without my father? He didn't know how to move when his greatest support was taken away. This pain, although invisible to those around him, became an invisible wall between him and the world. Everything around him continued to move, people were laughing, going for walks, going about their business. And Thomas couldn't understand how they could just go on living when his inner world was destroyed. Over time, the pain began to turn into anger. Thomas felt this anger growing inside him, consuming everything around him. At first, he tried to control himself. He believed that he could control himself, that he had to be strong, even if he was in pain. But each new day brought more suffering, and with each passing day, he began to notice how this anger turned into an uncontrollable emotional storm. He began to explode over the smallest of things. If his friends tried to interest him in something he had previously enjoyed, he couldn't understand how they could be so light, so joyful, when his heart was broken. How could they laugh when he felt like his world had fallen apart? Every joke, every laugh, seemed to him a step towards drowning out his pain, to forgetting about his loss. And this made him even more irritable. Thomas began to experience an incomprehensible gap between himself and his surroundings. His emotions became so strong that he could not cope with them. He could not find the strength to explain to his friends why he had changed so much, why he had become like this. He could not find the words to tell them that every day without his father was like a repeat of the worst day of his life, the day when everything changed. Thomas felt wounded and isolated, even when he was among people. Soon after this internal conflict began to develop, Thomas began to avoid seeing his friends. He felt like they couldn't understand what he was going through. How could he explain to them that the pain of losing his father was so deep that he couldn't even find the words to express it? How could he tell them that his day wasn't just another day, but one filled with pain and despair that he didn't know how to get through? He became even more withdrawn when his friends tried to help him without finding the right words. Their attempts to support him were perceived as attempts to take away his pain, not understanding that this pain couldn't be cured simply by words. He couldn't find a common language with them because every word they said felt like something out of place. He couldn't tell them that his world had lost its former shape and that he needed more time to find his strength. Thomas could not accept that the world around him continued to live its own life when his own was falling apart. It was difficult for him to see his classmates laughing, joking, planning their future, when he did not understand how to live on without the one who was his support and his greatest friend. All this deepened his feeling of loneliness. Even when he was among people, he felt completely isolated. His emotions became so strong that he could not find a way to share them with others. Every day, every moment seemed difficult and unbearable to him. Although his friends tried to support him, Thomas could not reveal his pain. He did not know how to convey what he felt. He was afraid of being weak, afraid that he would not be understood, that he would seem like an irresistible case. Thomas could not find the strength to get out of this vicious circle of pain and loneliness. And although he did not want to stay in this state, he did not understand how to get out of it. He didn't know what to do with his emotions, because everything he felt was so strong that it seemed to leave him no chance of escape. Thomas began to understand that the memories of his father, although painful, could be his strength, not just a wound. He realized that they would no longer be just a source of sadness, they could be something that would help him move forward, and this was the first step towards his recovery. He learned to accept these moments and not run away from them. On the contrary, he began to appreciate these memories more, even through the pain. He listened to their favorite music, not as an attempt to turn back time, but as an opportunity to feel his father's presence in his life. Each song became like a bridge connecting him to him, even though this man was no longer around. The books that his father recommended to him became his favorites, and when Thomas read them, he felt that he was still living in a world where his father was there. Every line, every page reminded him of what his father had invested in his life, his love of knowledge, his desire to learn new things, the importance of not giving up in the most difficult moments. Thomas often asked himself why this had happened, and why the pain would not go away. But over time, he began to understand that the important question was not why, but how he would live with this loss. He realized that he would not be able to forget his father, and that was normal. Instead of looking for a way to erase these memories, he began to accept them as a part of himself. It was a difficult process, but with each new day, with each moment experienced, he became stronger. Thomas began to notice that the pain, although it had not disappeared, no longer ruled his life. He was no longer a prisoner of his feelings. He learned to live with this wound, not allowing it to determine his every step. The memories of his father, although they brought pain, also became his inner strength. Thomas began to understand that accepting this loss was not the end, but the beginning of a new stage. And although the world he lived in had changed, Thomas found the strength to move forward, realizing that his pain did not define his existence. He began to build a new reality where his father was no longer there, but his lessons, his love, and his memories remained with him. This process was difficult and long, but Thomas was no longer afraid of change. He no longer tried to run away from the pain, but on the contrary, he began to use it to become stronger. And although this pain remained, it was no longer a barrier for him, but rather a part of who he had become. In the end, Thomas realized that his strength did not lie in forgetting, but in living with what had happened and accepting it as part of his journey. He began to see the world in a new light. Each day, although it brought new challenges, gave him an opportunity to learn, grow, and develop. The memories of his father were no longer just a heavy burden. They became part of his inner wisdom, which allowed him to cope with difficulties and find the strength to start anew. Thomas understood that the world would no longer be the same as it was, and that was okay. He accepted that he could not change it, but he could change himself, and that was the greatest achievement he could give himself. Marta tried to support her son, but it became more difficult every day. She saw him change, how the pain and anger consumed him, and she could not find a way to help him cope with what had happened. Her own pain was just as severe, and although she tried to be strong for him, she often felt powerless. Thomas was too broken to accept her support. At first he tried to contain his emotions in front of her, but over time his anger began to spiral out of control. His mother was the last person he could hurt, and it hurt him that he did it, but he could not stop. Every time she tried to talk to him or give him advice, he would explode. Her attempts to help only increased his irritation. He felt that her words were just an attempt to make him forget about the pain, and he could not do that. To him, it seemed impossible. Martha watched her son drift away from her, how with each outburst of emotion that came from him, they became more emotionally distant. She didn't know how to get close to him again, how to find a way to his heart when he was starting to lose touch with himself. It hurt her to see him explode with anger, and that even her presence couldn't calm him down. It was a void she couldn't fill, and she didn't know how to help her son, who seemed to reject her every time she tried to get close to him. Thomas couldn't understand why he was lashing out at her. He had a hard time understanding why even her support was causing him such a reaction. He didn't have the space to understand his own emotions, and they were, in turn, spilling out onto the people he remained with, especially his mother. This anger had no outlet, and Thomas didn't know how to deal with it. He didn't understand why he was behaving this way, but he couldn't stop. It was a struggle that left both him and her feeling lost. Thomas couldn't find the strength to return to his mother, and Martha didn't know how to help her son, who had become distant, a stranger to her. They both remained in their own inner worlds, not knowing how to walk this difficult path together.